We don't often talk about motivation and fear in the same breath. At first glance, they seem like opposites. Motivation as a driving force toward action, and fear as something that holds us back. But in reality, these two forces are deeply intertwined. Fear, in many cases, doesn't just paralyze us. It shapes and influences the very motivations we rely on to pursue our goals. If we want to truly understand what drives us, or what stops us, we need to look at the neuroscience behind these forces and how they play out in our everyday lives. At the center of this dynamic is dopamine, a neurotransmitter often misunderstood as the feel-good chemical. While it's true that dopamine plays a role in pleasure, its primary function is more complex. Dopamine is the brain's motivator, responsible for craving, anticipation, and the pursuit of rewards. When you see an opportunity, a chance for success, a delicious meal, or even social recognition, dopamine surges, creating a sense of excitement and possibility. This isn't about the reward itself, but about the expectation of the reward. It's what makes you get up early to train for a marathon or stay late at work to finish a project. However, the system isn't perfect. For many of us, fear enters the equation and distorts the cycle. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, or even fear of success can short-circuit this dopamine-driven pursuit. Take procrastination, for example. You might desperately want to complete a task, but the fear of not doing it perfectly, or of being criticized, stalls your action. In this case, fear overrides the natural craving motivation pursuit cycle, creating a feedback loop of avoidance and guilt. This fear is often amplified by societal attitudes toward productivity. In many cultures, laziness is not just a personal shortcoming, it's viewed as a moral failing. The pressure to constantly achieve and be productive creates a fear of being perceived as lazy. Paradoxically, this fear can become so overwhelming that it suppresses motivation altogether, leaving us stuck in a state of inaction. Let's take a real-life example. Think about a student preparing for a big exam. On one hand, they're motivated by the desire for good grades and future opportunities. On the other, they're terrified of failing. That fear can manifest as avoidance, scrolling through social media instead of studying, because the brain would rather escape the discomfort of fear than confront it. Yet as the deadline approaches, the fear of missing out on the reward, good grades, might trigger a last-minute surge of motivation, thanks to dopamine. This explains why so many of us work better under pressure. The heightened sense of urgency amplifies dopamine release, temporarily overriding fear. Another fascinating aspect of dopamine is its relationship with progress. Dopamine isn't just released when we achieve a goal, it's released as we pursue it, particularly when we make measurable progress. Small wins, like checking off a to-do list item or completing a chapter of a book, trigger dopamine surges that reinforce our efforts and keep us moving forward. This is why breaking big goals into smaller, manageable tasks is so effective. Each completed step fuels the drive to tackle the next one. But what happens when the anticipated reward doesn't match reality? This is where things get tricky. If you put in effort and the outcome isn't as satisfying as expected, dopamine levels drop. This creates a feeling of disappointment, and your brain recalibrates its motivation system, often making it harder to pursue similar goals in the future. For example, someone who spends years pursuing a career milestone only to feel unfulfilled afterward may find it difficult to muster the same level of motivation for their next endeavor. To navigate this complex interplay between wanting, pursuing, and fear, we need to reframe our relationship with motivation. One key strategy is to shift focus away from the fear of failure and toward the pursuit of progress. This can involve redefining success, not as an all-or-nothing outcome, but as a series of incremental steps. For instance, instead of setting a vague goal like become successful, break it down. Attend a networking event, send 3 follow-up emails, or complete 1 skill-building course. Each step triggers its own dopamine release, keeping you motivated along the way. Another strategy is to normalize fear as part of the process. Fear doesn't always mean you're on the wrong path. In fact, it often signals that you're stepping outside your comfort zone, a prerequisite for growth. Athletes, performers, and entrepreneurs frequently use this to their advantage, reframing fear as excitement or a sign that they're chasing something meaningful. Think about someone training for their first marathon. They might be terrified of not finishing or coming in last, but the act of training, logging each mile, improving their pace, creates a series of small victories. Over time, these wins build confidence and override the initial fear, driven by the same dopamine system that once made the goal feel intimidating. Ultimately, wanting something is just the starting point. The real challenge lies in pursuing it, navigating the fears and uncertainties that arise along the way. Understanding the role of dopamine gives us a roadmap for sustaining motivation, even in the face of setbacks. It reminds us that progress, no matter how small, is its own reward, and that fear is not a barrier, but a companion on the journey. Motivation and fear aren't opposites. They're two sides of the same coin. By embracing this duality and harnessing the power of dopamine, we can transform our ambitions into actions and our fears into fuel for growth. Whether you're chasing a dream, building a career, or simply trying to stay consistent with a new habit, the key lies in taking that first step, and then the next, until the pursuit becomes its own reward.